I think the primary thing my teachers did to encourage me was just showing interest in my work, not only helping me develop my writing, but just really encouraging me. I had teachers that, really affirmed me in my writing.
Welcome to the BJU Press Teacher Edition podcast, where Christian educators are encouraged and inspired as we bring you interviews, practical ideas, strategies, and answer your questions about teaching in today's culture. And here's your host, Jenny Copeland.
So likely by this time in the year, you're starting to identify the strengths of your students. You're getting to know their personalities, their interests, even their talents. Sometimes we can see talents in our students that they don't even see yet in their own lives. I don't know about you, but as a teacher, I had a few students who were just fantastic writers. They didn't see themselves that way, but writing was definitely their go-to. So my girls came equipped with all their gel pens and journals, and they were my court reporters all day long. Everything was documented. They thrived on essay questions. I even had some boys. They were so gifted in getting their thoughts onto paper. Their imagination was just incredible. I always had a respect for that. I mean, that is a gift from God, a God-given gift to them. Writing was never my forte. I am the one who had to use a lot of brain cells to get those words onto the paper. Well, now talking, that was a different story. I'll just say my first grade teacher put on my report card that I had an incredible ability to talk and listen at the same time. We'll just leave it at that. There's nothing else to say there. I was not receiving any accolades for my writing, but God has incredibly blessed so many with the gift to write. And today I want to talk about being a writer and supporting our young writers. Once again, let me just start with my welcome to each of you, our listeners. I'm just so glad you've joined in. Of course, I can't start an episode without reminding you to check out our website, teachereditionpodcast.com. We have great information there, a place to subscribe to our newsletters, and of course, also a place where you can leave questions for us to use on our episodes. For those of you who are on social media, a reminder to you, you can find us on Facebook as Teacher Edition Podcast, also on Instagram and TikTok as Teacher Edition Pod. And of course, for those of you who are listening, don't forget you can watch this interview on YouTube. Just look for us as Teacher Edition Podcast. So we're talking about writing and being a writer. And I really couldn't think of a better way to talk about writing than to talk about that with a writer, an author, a published author at that. We're really privileged today to have Eileen Berry with us on the show. She's contributed stories, poems, nonfiction pieces to a variety of educational materials. She has a number of published children's books and also has produced a number of sacred choral lyrics for both children and adults. Eileen Berry is a writer here at BJU Press, and she also teaches university courses. Imagine this, about writing for children and poetry writing. For those who are watching this interview, I have with me a little show and tell of books from Eileen. This is an accomplishment. This is an accomplishment to be published. And just to think, I don't know, when I think about that, it's amazing that every day people are benefiting from her writing. People are reading and benefiting from what the talent is that God has given her and how she's using that. I actually have the privilege of working on a team where Eileen is one of the writers. And it's just so evident God has gifted her in that area of writing, and she's using that gift every day in her work here at BJU Press and even outside of the press. So Eileen, this is an honor for us to have you with us here today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Jenny.
Okay, so I would love to start with your story. For those of us who are not writers, I always love hearing, what is it like to have that talent? How did you find out you had that talent? So if you would, share with us, how did you get interested in writing?
Well, that's an interesting question because I really cannot remember when I didn't love to write. I just have loved to write for as long as I can remember. So probably from the minute I could hold a pencil. But I think an important thing was that the Lord really gave me a family that nurtured in me a love for stories and reading and language. One of my grandmothers was just a riveting storyteller. And I remember her story. We would beg her for stories, and she would tell these stories with all these descriptive details and realistic sound effects like a hoot owl and, just things that would make shivers go up my spine. They were very suspenseful stories. So she was my storytelling grandmother. And then my other grandmother She would come over to our house for dinner about once a week, and she would always bring me a new book every time she came. So she really kind of stocked my little library. And then my parents read to me all the time, and all kinds of different books. And really, it wasn't long before I started reading on my own. I remember picking up a Laura Ingalls Wilder book one time and opening it up. I was just going to look at the pictures, and all of a sudden I realized I can read some of those words. Um, so from then on, I was reading, and I had a favorite tree in our backyard that I would climb with a book in my hand, and I would sit up there in the tree for hours, just swaying in those branches with the wind and reading my book. So after reading a lot, I started creating my own stories. And I think it was just a matter of coming to realize how much I loved words themselves and how much joy I found in putting words together and just trying to create something beautiful and meaningful with words. So every little spiral notebook I could find, I would write stories in it. I often wrote stories about a mouse family. I wrote stories about girls who had horses because I didn't have a horse and I wanted one.
Right.
And eventually I started submitting a few stories to contests. And one time, one of my stories won a contest in a children's magazine. And so the Lord really encouraged me that maybe I really could be a writer. I also had several teachers in both elementary school and high school who also really, really encouraged my love for writing. So I think that's kind of a long answer, but I think all of those things were just ways that the Lord helped me see that writing was a gift He had given me and something I really could use for Him.
That's amazing. And I love hearing how so many people had input into that in your life.
Yes.
You listed person after person who helped that and nurtured that talent and just brought all that, together. The Lord gave you the talent, but so many people fed into that and recognized that talent. I love that. So talk to us about what you write. So obviously we see writers who follow a certain style or a certain genre. What about you? What do you write?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am a writer at BJU Press, so I have to admit that after writing all day, it's sometimes hard to write more in my spare time. But so a lot of what I do is shorter things. I think maybe I don't have, just a super long attention span after I've been writing all day. So I do write a lot of poetry. I enjoy writing just regular poems and then poems that are meant to be sung. I also really love music. And then I do write children's books as well. And I try to pretty much always have either a children's book that I'm working on or at least an idea for something that I'm working on in my head.
That's so fantastic. And we definitely need more of that good children's literature. That's so great. Okay, so you mentioned a little bit, you write children's stories and other things. Share with us about some of your books. Can you share their titles, maybe a little bit about them? I know I have a few here, but tell us about them.
Okay, so I have two picture books, Roses on Baker Street. That was my very first book, and it kind of reflects some experiences I had being on a missions trip to France. So I wrote about a little girl who had been a missionary in France and come home to the States. Benjamin's Sling is my other picture book. That's a Christmas book about one of the shepherds who was there at the birth of Christ. And I have three chapter books, Haiku on Your Shoe, Looking for Home, and Buttercup Hill. And those are all for early readers. I have a book of fable retellings. It's called Sticky Flies, Whirling Squirrels, and Plucky Ducks.
That's quite the
And
title.
I took the title from different fables that are part of the collection. And of course, I didn't write my own fables. They're just kind of fables that I retold. And then I have a biography for children on the life of Frances Ridley Havergal. She was a hymn writer, and that's called A Poet for the King.
That's fantastic. Okay, so obviously a number of those are children's books, but I know you've also done writing for adults as well. It seems like it would be quite the contrast. Again, I'm a non-writer, so I'm not published, I'm not an author. So give us your insights in your experience. How is writing for children different from writing for adults? What's the difference?
Well, I like to think of writing for children as kind of writing as two people at the same time. So you're writing as the grown-up person that you are, with hopefully a certain level of wisdom and experience that you're bringing to the table from the life that you've lived. But you're also writing from the viewpoint of the child you once were. And so it's really important to be able to remember what it's like to be a child, to kind of be able to get back into the mindset of a child and maybe remembering just what your struggles were as a child, or your fears, or your dreams, things that were important to you. Another thing that's a little different with writing for children, I know sometimes people tend to think, oh, writing for children, that's a lot easier than writing for adults. It's
Oh
probably,
no.
something anyone could do.
No,
But
no,
I
no.
have found to some degree that it's a little harder to write for children. I like to think of writing for children as writing in miniature. I went to a children's toy and miniature museum one time, and they made a distinction there between toys and miniatures. And they said miniatures are different from toys in that they are just a smaller version of a larger object that's perfect in scale in every way. And they're not toys. And I think that's kind of a parallel to what a children's book is. It's a work for adults, but it's written to scale for a child. So it needs to reflect that same level of craftsmanship and skill that a work for adults would have. But you're limited in several ways. It's got to be shorter, and you're limited in your vocabulary that you can use, and even the choice of words, the sentence structure that you use. It has to be readable for children. So it's just a work for adults in miniature.
Okay, so I guess maybe one of my number one questions for you is, where do you get your ideas? If someone came up and told me, write a story, they even promised to publish it, I would have no idea even where to start. And actually, that kind of sounds like my own students. When I was in the classroom, I don't know what to write. Okay, so Eileen, what is the secret? Please tell us. Where do you get these ideas?
Well, ideas really come from all different places. I get a lot of ideas from my own life experiences, and as I already mentioned, I do draw a lot from my own childhood memories. And one time I just came up with this list of questions that I ask myself when I want to recall my childhood memories. And I give this list of questions to my writing for children students. So they like to call this list getting in touch with your inner child. So there are questions like, what were my favorite things? What were my favorite toys, games, foods, clothes, animals, colors? What special abilities or talents did I have as a child? What did adults praise me for as a child? What did adults scold me for as a child? What made me feel safe? What frightened me? What hurt my feelings? What made me laugh? What made me angry? Even things like vacations or trips. Did I go to any interesting places that I remember? Did anything like that change my life in some way? And then what did I think about things? What did I think about God when I was a child? What did I think about love? What did I think about death? What did I think about family relationships? What were my favorite stories, books, songs? Did I have any pets? Just all kinds of things like that that you can ask yourself to kind of harvest your memories of what it was like to be a child. So I do kind of begin by asking myself a lot of questions. And then ideas also tend to come from things that I'm experiencing now as an adult. So people I meet, places I've been, or just ideas that are important to me, or maybe a lesson that the Lord is teaching me at a particular time in
Sure.
my life. I'll just give one example of the way I got my idea for my children's book, Benjamin Sling. And it's actually fairly personal, but that was a book that Journey Forth assigned me to write because they needed a Christmas book. So I thought and thought and thought about some different aspect of Christmas that I could write about. And I just felt like everything's already been written about Christmas. But
That is a hard one.
but it happened to be the year right after my mom had died of cancer. I was thinking through that experience as I was trying to get an idea for this Christmas book. And I realized I had been struggling with an emotion that I had not expected to feel, and that was fear. I just had a lot of fear in my heart about, what the Lord might allow to happen to me next. And was I going to experience more loss? Was someone else in our family going to develop the same kind of cancer? And just working through those fears was something that was just right at the forefront of my mind at that time. And I started to realize that I really had a fundamental problem between myself and God. And that was I was afraid to trust God. And He really taught me, He wanted me to trust Him with my past, my present, and my eternal future. So that was kind of the experience that I wanted to somehow put into this Christmas book. So I got the idea to write about one of the shepherds, a little boy who was a shepherd when the angels appeared. And he too had experienced loss. He had lost his father fairly recently. And when the angel came and announced the birth of the Christ child, he had to leave his little pet lamb, who was really kind of his security object. And he had to trust the Lord to take care of his lamb while he went to see the Christ child. And then in the process of going to see that baby, he realized he needed to put his life in the hands of that little baby and trust him. So once I knew what needed to happen in Benjamin's heart, it was like his story kind of wrote itself because it was my story. So, sometimes ideas can come from a very personal experience that I want to make relevant to children in some way.
Talk with us about the process of writing a book. So no doubt we have listeners who are interested in writing, or maybe they're encouraging young writers in their classes. What does that writing process look like? It sounds a little scary to us non-writers. So talk to us about that.
Well, I usually just kind of live with the fragments of an idea in my head for a while. And I don't really actively work on it. I just go about my business and let it kind of simmer in the back of my mind. And eventually I start jotting down ideas. So I might get an idea for a character or a way to develop the plot. And I just, keep jotting down ideas until the story grows enough to start writing it. Now, for me, the way that I work best, I like to have sort of a rough plan in my mind at the beginning, but I don't want to get too locked in. I like to allow for serendipity while I'm writing. And this is very different from how we have to write at BJU Press. We have to plan
Right.
everything ahead of time.
Yes, very
But
planned.
I actually, I really like to have flexibility while I'm writing to kind of change course or maybe see connections within the story, maybe discover ways I can support the theme through imagery or a symbol that I can work in, or maybe even have the characters go in a little bit different direction than I had planned. So just as an example, my book, Haiku on Your Shoe, is the story of a young boy who's trying to pursue a friendship with a shy new student at school. So the theme of the book is that friendship requires loving perseverance, and that is the way God pursues a relationship with us. So the story takes place in winter, and within the story, I just realized I could work in a lot of imagery that would help support that theme. So I included a lot of images of things melting and thawing whenever I could. So icicles dripping, snow melting, candle wax melting, marshmallows dissolving in hot chocolate. And those were intended to kind of show that people often thaw gradually in response to love. So, there's things like that that I like to discover as I write. And some of my books have kind of seemed to write themselves. They've come very easily, and others not so much. Others have been a lot more work and struggle. The most recent book I've finished was actually quite a struggle, and I had to put myself on a pretty strict writing schedule and set specific goals for finishing each chapter. But even if the actual writing process is a struggle, there's just such a feeling of satisfaction that comes when you finish.
I bet so.
And, just the knowledge that God helped you complete that task. And it's really worth all the struggle.
So, as with anyone who has a talent or a hobby, we know there is that joy in accomplishment and that finishing. We hear about runners and the runner's high. There's great accomplishment for musicians who tackle a really challenging piece. Okay, so what about for you as a writer? What do you find rewarding about writing? You have a talent. You talked to us about the struggle on some of them, getting it done. What do you see as the reward of that?
Yeah. Well, I actually get a lot of joy just out of the process itself. And that might sound kind of weird to people that don't like to write and who feel like writing is pulling teeth for them. But for me, I just really love the process of working with words. I think about words a lot, and I love putting them together in a way that seems just right and that really communicates what I want to say. And then when books are done, when writing is completed, I really love getting to share my work personally with an audience, especially an audience of children. So I love having opportunities to read my work to children, or maybe getting letters from children who have read my work. I love to hear what they have to say about what I've written. So, just seeing my audience relating to things that I write, or coming to understand something in a different way is just very rewarding. And it always reminds me that writing is a gift from God, and
Absolutely.
it can be a very powerful thing. And sharing stories can be a way to connect with people that I might never meet otherwise. I think there are some children who might connect with something in a book that really makes them feel like someone understands them and that they're not alone in whatever it is that they're dealing with. So I just really love to use the gift of writing intentionally to try to share things about God, about His character, His word, and I'm just trying to do that through stories.
So, the big question, do you have anything in the works right now? What can we be looking forward to?
Well, I'm very excited to share that I do have something in the
Oh, good.
works, and it is scheduled to come out next year sometime.
Ooh.
I've been told to look for it in the early spring of 2025. So it's another children's biography. It's been accepted by Journeyforth, and this is the story of Lilias Trotter. Lilias Trotter was an English missionary who spent her life in North Africa, primarily Algeria. She went to unreached people. She would take, trips into the desert. She traveled by camel sometimes and just tried to find people that she could share the good news of Jesus Christ with. She was also a very gifted artist, and she left behind just a wealth of beautiful watercolors, trying to capture the beauty of the desert and the people there and the flowers. She also wrote and illustrated parables for the Arab people that she was working with. She discovered that they were a people who in their culture really loved stories, and stories that had kind of a symbolic significance. Those types of stories really resonated with them. So she created a lot of stories like that and illustrated them to help share different aspects of the gospel and the Christian life with them. And so a lot of those writings and illustrations are still available. I actually got the wonderful privilege of traveling to England 2 years ago, and I got to research Lilias Trotter's personal papers and artwork at the University of London and the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And it was just one of the most wonderful experiences I had ever had. I just felt like it was so surreal to sit there and hold these little journals that she had actually touched and drawn in and written over 100 years ago. That process of researching the book was also really exciting for me. And then trying to tell her story. She also struggled with significant health challenges and just various setbacks in the missionary work. And so her life has just been a real inspiration to me. And I'm just thrilled to get to share her life with children. Hopefully the book will come out in the late spring, and maybe you could get a copy.
That is so fantastic. All right, listeners, you have inside information right here. There's a new book headed your way. I'm really excited about that. That sounds great. And someone I've never heard of that individual before. So this is something new that we can learn. And it sounds like there's so many interesting talents and all kinds of things intermixing in her life there. So excited about that. That's great. Fantastic. I wondered if you could share some advice for our listeners. We love making this podcast as practical as can be. And this has been so helpful, what you've done. But no doubt some of them, they're seeing talent in some of their students in the area of writing. They know some of their students want to be writers. What is your advice to them as teachers? How could they best encourage these writers and support them in maybe, a talent they have or something they want to do with their life? What would you say to those teachers?
I think the primary thing my teachers did to encourage me was just showing interest in my work, not only helping me develop my writing talents, but just really encouraging me. I guess I tended to doubt myself a lot, but I had teachers that, really affirmed me in my writing gifts. And sometimes, I would have teachers encourage me to enter contests or encourage me to share my writing with others. Sometimes a teacher would read something I wrote to the class, and that was just such a huge encouragement to me that teacher, felt like that was worth sharing with other people. I remember one of my teachers every Friday we would have a journal time, and she would always give us smart pills while we wrote in our journals, and the smart pills were M&Ms.
Maybe that's what I was missing. I didn't know.
So we would eat our smart pills and we would write in our journals. And she would always tell us, whatever you do, just keep writing, keep your pen moving. If you don't know what to write, just write, I don't know what to write. And then when you think of something to really write, start writing again. And so she would, collect our journals every so often and read them and just write comments that showed she was interested in what we were trying to communicate, however silly it may have been. But that just interest in helping us communicate through writing and teaching us just even the process of how to push through writer's block was so encouraging to me. I just remember finding a lot of joy in her class doing that. So anything like that you can do to encourage maybe even struggling writers would be wonderful. And also kind of affirming those who do have gifts in writing, encouraging them to pursue that and even to get further training as they get older. All those things would be super encouraging for your students.
That's fantastic advice. So often that spotlight goes to our sports our students who are excelling in sports or excelling as a musician. And sometimes we forget about those who have other talents. And I think what I pulled from what you just said there too is that we don't have to be a professional writer ourselves to encourage a young writer. And I think that's really, really good advice. Who just, when you see them, when you see that interest, when you see that talent or that desire, to just come alongside and encourage them and affirm what they're doing. And I love what you said there. And even me, as I said, I'm not a writer, but I can come alongside those who do have that talent and encourage them.
Yes.
That's excellent advice. This has been a privilege today. Eileen, thank you for sitting down with us. Listeners, I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I know you have. Eileen, thank you for sharing with us. I know your time is so valuable, but thank you for sitting down with us. Thank you for the work you do every day in producing textbooks, but also in great books. They're just so well written and God-honoring for young readers, especially, but we know you've done all types of writing. We appreciate that. It's just really been an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It was a real pleasure for me.
This has been a privilege to sit down with Eileen today. Listeners, I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I'm so grateful for authors such as Eileen, who are using their talents to produce great works that are just so well written and so God-honoring. Listeners, thank you once again for joining us today. I hope you were challenged and inspired as I was. Remember to go to teachereditionpodcast.com to submit questions for upcoming episodes. Of course, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Now, it's time to get back to your day. But it's not just any day, because every day in the classroom is your day to impact and inspire through God's power and through His grace working in you. Go do what God has called you to do.